How's everybody doing? Hi, Marcia.
Hey, how you doing?
Good to sort of see you.
Back will not want to see me.
You kind of broke up a little bit there, but.
Well, we're not done yet.
Right. This. All right, so it looks like I think we're live on Facebook. Hopefully we're live on Facebook.
It says on my Zoom.
The volume on here, thinking it might help on the TV. I did the volume more up on the TV.
Hi, Anna.
Yeah, well, there's some place there's a volume control here, and darn if I'm seeing it.
James, I can hear you.
Mine is,
Let me see here. Maybe no, it's I can control it from the screen.
oh, okay.
Hello, Charlie.
Hey,
How are you?
who's talking? I'm doing
That's
fine.
Dana. Dana Sargent is talking.
Oh, great. I see you. I see you now.
Good to see you. And if you're not familiar, if you'd like to see all the people, up in the top right corner of your screen, you should see a little thing that says gallery view. If you click that thing, you'll be able to see a lot more people.
That's good enough. I don't even want to see myself.
Hello, Evelyn.
Hello.
So we're gonna let people filter in, and then at around just before 9, I'm gonna introduce Jane, and then I'm gonna mute folks. So in the meantime, if you want to chit chat with one another, feel free. Now's your chance. Otherwise, Evelyn, I love your background. Universe.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, Camille.
Good morning, Evelyn.
All these people I normally see on the water.
Yes.
Dana, can you manage the chat as I talk? So if there's something that I should pause to look at.
I'm gonna actually introduce somebody named Charlie here in a little bit, and I'm gonna ask her to do that because I have a conflicting meeting that starts at 9, so I'm gonna have to be sort of not listening to you. And she's gonna be moderating after I introduce you.
Oh, okay.
But she's gonna be able to handle that. You can see the chat, right, Charlie?
Yeah.
Okay. And as well as Facebook, Charlie, which I forgot to mention, if you can put that maybe on your phone on the side and watch for questions later on, and just shoot them over to Jane.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, vocalize them to Jane. Hi, Carol.
Hi.
We've learned a lot more since we started teaching with this, but it's still crazy.
Mm-hmm. It definitely is. I don't know who that was. I'm getting too many people on. Hi, Steve.
Good morning.
Oh, yay! Betty, I haven't seen you in so long.
I know.
How are you?
I've been hiding. I'm old and infirm. I've been hiding.
How are you feeling?
Hi, Joanna.
Good morning, Jeannie.
Hi. Hi, Jeannie.
Hello. How is everybody?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm great.
Good. Betty, your name says David's fourth fire.
Yeah.
Yay.
How many
David
fires
Barr.
does one person have?
girl, Daisy. Hi. Hi.
Good morning, Madison. Oh,
Morning.
how are you?
Good. How about you?
Good, good. I've got 2 coffees because I have a friend in town, so I'm extra good. Gray. Hello, Gray. I think it says Gray, Graye. I don't know if that's your name, but good morning. All right, it's 8:57. I'm gonna give it a couple more minutes.
This is Earl Grey, who's on to watch.
Earl Grey.
Yeah.
It's a great name.
Hey, Earl, it's been a long time.
Good morning, Jane.
Hello, Sue.
Good morning.
Nice to hear you, I should say.
Well, maybe you can see me. Just a minute.
There you are.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good. Drake, you made it. Good morning, Drake. All right. Keep them coming.
And there's Claire from my group. Just logged in, Claire Critchley.
Oh, Claire. Good morning. How are you, Claire?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Oh, looks like we're going to a two-pager, which is good. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning.
How are you?
Not bad. How about yourself?
Doing great, thank you. Hello, Gail and Laura.
Do you feel like you're on Romper Room now, Dana?
Woohoo! Yes, romping around.
It's not ours.
Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. How are you? How are you, Dana?
I am great. How are you doing?
All right.
So if y'all want to see everybody for a little bit, again, if you're not familiar with this Zoom thing, you can click up in the top right where it says, it's got like a little box, a bunch of little boxes that says gallery view, and you'll be able to see everybody for a little while. When Jane gets started,
Thank you.
that will change. It's 9 o'clock now, so I'm going to start because I do have a couple introductions to make this morning. I have one to make just before I introduced Jane. I'm just going to let these last few people get their audio going. So first of all, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. It is great to see you / hear some of you. I'm really excited about this opportunity that we have for Dr. Hoppin to talk to us about the GenX Exposure Study. First thing I want to do is introduce our brand new staff member, Charlie Orner. She's on the screen if you can see her somewhere. Charlie, just say hi. So
Hi.
there now, if you have her just on audio, you'll be able to see her. Charlie is our brand new, just started Monday, Membership Development and Communications Officer. I am extremely excited to have her. And I have a conflicting meeting that's starting right now. And so after I introduce Jane, I'm going to obviously leave everything open because we're recording on my computer and everything like that. But Charlie's going to end up taking over facilitation for the Q&A section. So if you don't feel comfortable talking, feel free to put it in the chat. She will read that out for Jane. For those of you watching on Facebook, please go ahead and make yourselves known and put your questions in the comments. Charlie will monitor those as well. And welcome to y'all. With that, I am going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Jane Hoppin is an environmental epidemiologist with more than 25 years of research focusing on how chemicals in the environment influence human health. Professor of Biological Sciences at NC State, Deputy Director of the Center for Human Health and the Environment. In addition to her work on the GenX Exposure Study, she has an ongoing research project in Costa Rica working to understand how pesticides influence the health of women and children living in the banana growing region. She's an avid kayaker and contra dancer, and lives in Raleigh, where she is currently supervised full-time by her dog Daisy, who may or may not join us today.
Yeah,
And
she's on the floor behind me.
Oh, she is there.
Okay, I'm on a Zoom.
And she's also a member, thankfully, of Cape Fear River Watch. Good morning, Deborah.
Good morning.
So with that, I am going to go ahead. I'm going to mute those of you who are not yet muted, and then share the screen over to Dr. Hoppin so she can go ahead and start the presentation.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for having me, getting up early this morning. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
You see it in the main view and not the so many of you, if you've been following us closely, have seen slides related to this, but I thought it was a good time to check in, tell you what's been going on behind the scenes, and where we're moving forward. So I hope that put your questions in the chat and we'll try to answer as much as possible. Okay, good morning. All right, so this is a paper that got it all started. This paper by Detlef Knappe and colleagues at EPA, Mark Schreiner and Andy Lindstrom. And this came out, as you remember, in December of 2016. But it was really this article that was in the Wilmington Star News almost exactly 3 years ago that started us down this path of what is GenX? It's a group of people? No, it's a group of chemicals. So it's about the 3-year anniversary. And so there's community response. And if you've been following Kemp's work, this is a Kemp slide. But there's a lot of community concern and what to do. And I'm learning to, apparently my mouse and I aren't. So we started this GenX Exposure Study. We had the opportunity to apply for funding from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences to get a small grant to respond to an emerging environmental health threat. And so we really designed the study to answer 3 questions. And we're really at the first question: is GenX detectable in my body? What predicts GenX in my body? And are there health effects associated with GenX? And so our goal was a community-based study to describe the levels of GenX. All right, I'm gonna just not use my mouse. But it was more than just GenX because as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, is GenX is part of a family of chemicals called per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS. And while GenX is uniquely related to the Chemours plant upstream, there are a number of other chemicals. And GenX has been released both by air and water from the Chemours plant since potentially 1980. But there are other products that have been measured in the river. And then also in the river are these historically used PFAS chemicals. So the overall goal of the study was to get a picture of what everything was. So to respond to community concerns, everybody wanted to know, am I exposed? Is it in my body? And what are the health effects? We had some scientific challenges, like what chemicals to look for. When we started out, some of the chemicals, we could name them, but we couldn't weigh them. We didn't have analytic standards. We had no information on the half-life. So how long will these chemicals stay in people's bodies. There was little or no toxicology data and nobody to compare to. So, but because we wanted to answer these questions, we tried to get data, some additional data along the way. So it really takes a village to make this happen. And it's not just the researchers at NC State, ECU, and EPA, but partnering with the health departments, both at New Hanover County and Cumberland County, Cape Fear River Watch. I mean, really without Cape Fear River Watch, we wouldn't have had the study work. And then our partners in Fayetteville at Sustainable Sandhills. But then also, we want everybody's input. Well, but we try to get it in constructive ways. So we have community science advisory panels, both in Wilmington and Fayetteville, to really try to capture the diversity of interest, concern. The health departments nobody wants to be surprised. Everybody, and I want to be sure that when we share information, it's in an appropriate manner for the community. So this helps us get a pulse of what's going on in the community, what are people hearing, how, what are good ways to talk about it. And so these individuals have been immensely helpful to us to just provide some additional input as we go, and particularly as we get ready to share data with people. So what do we do? And so let's see what's working. So you can see my team in the middle is one of the phlebotomists that we had at the MLK Center. You see a lot of packets of paper. That's how we document everybody, because once you join the study, you're a number to us. So that way we can protect your identity. And so we're really working in 2 impacted communities. So we started in Wilmington, and as you know, everybody was exposed because of wastewater discharge to the Cape Fear River. And at the time that we got started, well, 3 years ago, the levels of GenX in the water were about 700 parts per trillion, or 700 nanograms per liter. And about 250,000 people are using the lower Cape Fear for their drinking water. And so we enrolled people in Wilmington in November of 2017 and May of 2018. We also received an additional grant to look at the people in the private well community in Fayetteville. And one of the reasons that we didn't start there is that we wrote the first grant in a month. And at that point, there was no identified group to explore this issue in Fayetteville. And so with the testing by Chemours and DEQ, we were able to sample from a list of people who had their wells tested for GenX. And of most importance for this is that the wells in Fayetteville are contaminated by emissions from the air rather than from the river. And we enrolled people in February of 2019. So the specific aims of the study are community engagement and interaction to ensure community needs are addressed, and to characterize human exposure along the lower Cape Fear in both Wilmington and Fayetteville. And then so that's measuring GenX in blood. And then we're also performing clinical chemistries to see whether they are altered in the presence of GenX exposure. I will say at the outset is that our study is big enough to see whether GenX is in people's blood, but not big enough to really evaluate whether these PFAS chemicals impact health outcomes, but they can give you some preliminary data. So in case people haven't heard this broad, what PFAS are, they're really over 4,000 chemicals, and they're important for their stain and water resistant properties, but they're also environmentally and biologically persistent. And so for this presentation, we'll talk about legacy PFAS, so those that were more historically used, those that we know something about, and then the new or emerging where we have little information. And these include things like GenX and Nathium byproduct 2. So our study design in Wilmington, we enrolled 344 people total, and 44 of them provide, wait, I have to take the squeaky toy away. Hey, Dave, no squeaky toy, sorry. We provided 44 samples 6 months apart. And we collected from every person blood and urine samples, and then every household a drinking water sample. And we analyzed the blood and drinking water so far for GenX and other PFAS, and that we've analyzed the serum for measures of thyroid function, liver function, and lipids. And so we're in the process, we've reported some of these results back, and we're now getting started in publishing scientifically some of these results. So one of the first questions when we jumped out of the gate is like, we didn't really know how long the exposure had been going on. And so what we decided is that anybody who lived in New Hanover County who received their water from Cape Fear Public Utility, because that way we could quantify whether they were served by surface water or groundwater source. And they had to live there at least a year before we knew that the water changed. And so that was July 1 of 2016. Anyone over 5 was eligible to be in the study, and we included up to 4 people per household, and people could enroll in both English or Spanish. And really, it's a result of Amanda Boomershine and her students at UNCW that we were really able to reach out to the Spanish-speaking community. So we had translators help with study recruitment and enrollment, going to people's homes and collecting water, and they are still involved in all the translation of documents that we send out to people. So that was a really important effort that she really helped us make happen. And then we excluded women who are pregnant and anybody who was HIV or hepatitis C positive. So we did a home and clinic visit. And so we collected tap water at people's homes. People came to a clinic. We drew their blood, collected urine samples, measured their height and weight, and administered a questionnaire. And you can see here on the top is our water collectors. In the middle are our lab crew for Wilmington. The tall gentleman in the middle is Dr. David Collier, our colleague at ECU, and students as well as our phlebotomist that was helping out there. And then we also did a second data collection at the MLK Center, and there's Shay Webb and another UNCW student who helped out in our recruitment. So who participated? So we had 289 adults and 55 children, and children range in age from 6 to 17. And we had a relatively racially diverse sample, though we'd like to do better as we move forward. And you can see on this graph is that over half the adults had lived there more than 20 years. And then over half the kids had lived there somewhere between 6 and 10 years. Our data works because none of the children have lived there more than 20 years. But we have a good distribution of exposure because some people have lived there longer and will potentially have had more years of exposure, and some people have lived there shorter. So did we find GenX in the blood? You guys all know the answer. We didn't find GenX in the blood. And we had a detection limit of mainly 2 nanograms per milliliter, but mostly it was much lower than that. And so this is where it gets into the importance of understanding the biology, is that GenX was a smaller chemical than PFOA. It was designed to be less environmentally persistent. And so, we would expect that it would persist in the body for a shorter period of time. And so, so one of the things we have to think about is that a chemical can have a half-life, and about 5 half-lives is equivalent to complete removal from the body. And so if the half-life of GenX in people's blood was 30 days, we sampled 5 to 6 months after people learned that their water was contaminated. And so it may have just been completely erased at that point in time. But also the levels of GenX in the water had dropped from 700 nanograms per liter to 50 nanograms per liter in November of 2017 to less than 10 nanograms per liter in May 2018. And so reassuring to us was that not only did we not measure it, it was not measured in the blood from people that participated in a survey done by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. So GenX may have a sufficiently short half-life that we aren't able to measure it in blood. But we did measure 4 new chemicals that had never been measured in people before. And these include naphthalene byproduct 2 and a related chemical called hydroeve, and 2 other chemicals that we were able to identify in people's blood. And so by the time we got to analyzing the blood, we did have analytic standards for all of these chemicals except hydroeve. So we were able to actually quantify and identify what, not only identify what they were, but identify how much was present. So we also, moving on to the legacy chemicals, so these are chemicals that have been measured by CDC in the NHANES study since 1999. And so those results are publicly available. But part of the NHANES survey is designed to be nationally representative, but really they only sample 3 or 4 locations every 2 years. And so they would miss hotspots anyway. So here's the overall, okay, so here's what we have. So US 1999, this is the level of PFOA in the general population. It's about 5 nanograms per milliliter. So that's the median. In 2015, it's lower than 2 and have dropped dramatically in that window, whereas Wilmington looks a lot like the US in 1999. And one of the things that's most important here is that the median, so half that the people in Wilmington exceed the 95th percentile for the US population for PFOA. Whoops. And it looks like PFOA in 1999. So why is there elevated levels? You know, the Cape Fear is a long river. They have lots of industry on it. So there is historical data on high PFOA in the lower Cape Fear. And there's also relatively some PFOA in the tap water still. And so there are upstream sources of PFOA, but we haven't quantified or identified really where it's coming from. And to just round out the story is that you also see this, the green bars are Wilmington. You also see that this elevated legacy PFAS for all of them, and the axes are labeled wrong. So the far right is PFOS, because the levels of PFOS are always higher than every other chemical in every population. But you can see that in general, Wilmington is always higher. So one of the things we wanted to know is what are the half-lives of these new chemicals? So how did the levels change over time? And so what we saw for these 44 people is that 6 months later, the levels of naphthalene byproduct 2, PFO4DA, and PFO5 DODA were much lower than they were before. And so we're now working to formally calculate the half-life of these chemicals, but it's safe to say, you know, PFO4DA dropped a lot. And remember, now we're only 44 people. We're not looking at our whole study sample. And so it may differ in children or may differ in different populations, but this is a first pass of the data. But we don't see this drop in the historically used chemicals. So that's kind of the overall of where we are in Wilmington. So what do we do in Fayetteville? And I feel like the work in Fayetteville has been really important, but we got the grant, then there were a few hurricanes, then we collected the blood, and then the government shut down. And so it's been difficult to get out to share our results. So it's a very similar study design. We had less money, so we tried to enroll 200 people, and we enrolled 156. But we, unlike Wilmington, where we did anybody who was served by Cape Fear Public Utility could be in the study, we tried to sample from this list that DEQ had generated, where they had people who were above, the wells that were above 140 and wells that were below 140, and so that we could create kind of a broad distribution. So it's not an entirely random sample. So not only did we collect blood, urine, and drinking water, but we also wanted to collect well water, dust, and wristbands. And so that allows us to look at kind of the environmental contributors to the other exposures. All right, so this is exactly the same. So we enrolled 153 people in February 2019, 137 adults and 16 children, 85 households, majority in Cumberland County. And we collected blood and urine, samples from a lot of people. And I will say that the response rate of the people in Fayetteville has been outstanding. If people, like everybody who took a wristband home mailed it back to us, which is pretty outstanding. So it gives us confidence that we can move forward. So I think, so we're focusing on both the air and water exposures, and our analyses are ongoing, much to the chagrin of the people in Fayetteville. So we just recently shared the water results with our participants in Fayetteville and are planning a community meeting 2 weeks from now. So we sampled 85 homes with wells and 82 taps. What we don't have a random sample, but what you can see is not surprising that we have a wide range of GenX that was measured in the wells when we visited people, and about half of the wells are above 140 that time and half below, which is good because that's how we designed the study. We also have people who are non-detected, which also helps us get a better gradient on GenX exposure, which we couldn't do in Wilmington because everybody was drinking the same drinking water. And so we measured many different PFAS in people's wells. And so one of the things that you'll see here, this is just the median, 50%, is that PMPA is the most common PFAS measured in the well water of people, followed by PFO2HXA and then GenX. And so, so that there's a lot of these lower molecular weight chemicals that are transferred through the air in the wells. And so one of the things is that we also, when we sampled at the tap, we tried to get a handle on how people were treating their water. And this again is in February of 2019, before the consent decree started people making changes. And so we can see though that the people who had treated taps had much lower levels of GenX in their drinking water than people who didn't. We also had 4 people who had already hooked up to municipal water. So what's next? So chemical analysis is number 1. And we're going to start with the Fayetteville samples. We were ready to go before this latest world shutdown. So hopefully when we start back up, we can get those analyzed quickly. But most importantly, and I haven't talked about this before, is that one of the things that we've been really working hard to do is to get samples of blood samples that were collected for other purposes before the water got turned off. So the fact that we couldn't measure GenX in people's blood doesn't mean that it's never been in people's blood, or was it just because people had changed their habits and they weren't being exposed? So this will let us have a picture of what the levels looked like before people knew that there were PFAS in the water. And also we have the urine samples on tap as well. And we have some of the wristbands analyzed, and we have the dust samples from Fayetteville. So COVID has pretty much closed laboratories. So we're prioritizing the blood samples when we can get back in, and then the urine samples, and then working to get the rest of these things analyzed. But we're also doing data analysis because that hasn't been closed down. So we're working on analyses that really identify what factors predict PFAS levels. Does living in Wilmington longer, do people have higher levels? Do women have higher levels than men? All of these things we haven't finalized. So these are the kinds of questions. We're doing some preliminary data on the health outcomes, but as I mentioned before, we're really not designed to answer those questions, but we are designed to create preliminary data. And then we also, my postdoc, Nadine Kotlars, who has done most of this amazing work, just received a pilot project from the Center for Human Health and the Environment, where we're going to see whether we can measure markers of immune function, such as cytokines, in people's blood to see if PFAS work on that. And then we have other things in the mix so we're using our time to analyze our data, clean our data, and try to get some papers out. So one of the things, the big thing that happened in March is that finally we received word, we received the funding for NIEHS funded Superfund Center called the Center for Environmental and Health Effects of PFAS. And it has 4 research projects. One of them, PFAS exposure and thyroid related health outcomes in communities along the Cape Fear River. That's the extension of the GenX Exposure Study. And then there's a project that's, the second one is a laboratory-based project that Jamie DeWitt, Jeff Yoder, and Seth Coleman are working on, and Drake is doing this for his doctoral work. And then the third is looking at how PFAS bioaccumulate and impact on food webs, and this is work that's being done by Scott Belcher, David Buckwalter, and Tony Plancher at NC State. And then the last is a project that Detlef is leading along with Mort Barlas to look at ways to work on remediation of PFAS. So it has both biological and environmental exposure engineering components. And so I encourage you to go check out that website for more details. But for the GenX Exposure Study, it means that we'll grow. We can transition from an exposure study to a health study. And while we received a 45% cut, which was super painful, I still think that we'll have enough we will have enough statistical power to start answering important questions. One of the very unique things about our study from the beginning is that we've always enrolled children. So we'll be able to continue to enroll children and look at how, whether we'll have a big enough sample to look at that. We'll grow from 500 to 1,000 participants. So hopefully have 400 people near Fayetteville and 600 that encompass people in New Hanover and Brunswick counties. We want to increase minority recruitment, and I think that we're well set to do that. And we'll have 5 years to do this work. We'll have 2 blood collection events where we'll measure PFAS. So 2 blood collection events, like we'll measure blood, collect blood in year 1 and year 3. We'll measure PFAS in those blood samples. We'll also measure thyroid hormones. And we decided when we wrote the grant to really focus on thyroid as an outcome is because the thyroid is so important for all sorts of things, regulation of weight, cholesterol. And so it lets us unify around something that's also relevant across the life course. So of course, our plans on data collection are evolving right now, and I hope we can have a discussion about what might work best. Last time we used a pop-up model where we took over the health department for a weekend, and we collected blood from 200 to 300 people. That is going to be hard to do now, and so how do we best collect data where we have to really be cognizant of social distancing, cleaning. But we also want to try to do it soon. So I'm hoping that when the state gets to phase 3, we can start to really work out logistical issues. I mean, people can still go to the doctor, but we budgeted pretty inexpensively. And so we need to figure out how we can do that. So getting some thoughts on how that might work. And then we have some proposed activities. So not surprisingly, National Institutes of Health is very interested in COVID right now. And so one of the main concerns of PFAS is that PFAS as a whole may alter response to vaccine. So lower vaccine response. Hey, come on. All right, enjoy your coffee for a minute. Hey, thanks. So if PFAS reduce vaccine response, how do they influence the response to this novel virus? So we're trying to get additional funds so that we can look at whether people with higher PFAS have different levels of COVID antibodies and then follow them forward. Hopefully, once they get vaccinated, then we can see whether COVID, that people's vaccine response was or wasn't different. So that's something that's got a short time horizon. And then we have a bigger grant that we had talked about last December, but it was just like an impossible time frame. And it's a research to action grant that really has community engagement as a major part. And so what I think it could shape out to be is something broader than what we can afford to do in the GenX Exposure Study. Remember that all this research is being funded by NIH research dollars, not the C8 Science Panel study was funded as a result of a court decree. So they had millions of dollars more than we will ever have. But I think that we could leverage what we're doing in the GenX Exposure Study to go more broadly and do a health survey of people in the basin Cape Fear River Basin, focusing on Fayetteville and Wilmington, but probably expanding upriver to Pittsburgh. And if we could do a survey of many more people and use data to reconstruct historic PFAS exposure, we would be able to evaluate health outcomes. But we'd also, as part of this, want to develop materials so that people could share them with their communities, and we could develop training for healthcare practitioners to address these concerns. So this idea is still developing, and would really appreciate thoughts on and suggestions about this. So December's a long way away, but it's tomorrow when you're writing a grant. So that would be really of interest to me to get your thoughts. And so as I end, here's some lingering questions. What we really don't know is like how long people were exposed to these chemicals in the river. We know that GenX was started to be released to the river since 1980, but what about naphthalene byproduct 2? What about PFOA? And this issue of half-lives becomes really important. How do we estimate exposure levels for chemicals with short half-lives? Just because we can't measure GenX doesn't mean that you weren't drinking it for 40 years. And just like alcohol, we can't measure what you drank last week, but if you've been drinking for 40 years, there are clearly health consequences of that. And so we want to figure out how we think about that. And the Fayetteville data will help us start to think about how do the chemicals that people are exposed to via air transport, are they the same as those in the river? And one of the big challenges is that exposure is to not just one chemical, but a mixture of chemicals. So as epidemiologists, we can measure this exposure and we can say overall, we can look at one chemical at a time, but we can also look at a mixture. The animal studies start out with one chemical or a few chemicals, and how do we integrate that together to really understand the impact of this very complex exposure? So, okay, some upcoming events where will involve me talking we're going to have our report back meeting in Fayetteville, June 20th at 11, and Zoom details to follow. And we'll share that with Dana and others. And we'll be able to use Zoom webinar, which will allow us to have up to 500 participants. So I think that will be great. The PFAS testing network is going to have a fall seminar series, which will be about 1 hour Zoom meetings, which will talk about some of this broad work that the PFAS testing network has been doing. And then in June of next year, there will be the 3rd National PFAS meeting that will be held in Wilmington. And this meeting has been held in Boston the past 2 years. It's held every other year. And so we're excited. The NC State Superfund Center is the lead, and Kemp and Deborah Maxwell and Veronica Carter and Emily Donovan have joined us to add a Wilmington flavor. So that will be awesome. So more to come. And really big thanks to all of you for helping making this study happen and all the support. I know it's frustrating that we can't give you as much data, as much answers as you would like, as soon as you would like them, but we're working really hard to make that happen as soon as we can. And so I encourage you to go to our website and learn more about what we're doing, and happy to take any questions.
All right, well, that was awesome. Thank you, Dr. Hoppin.
Sure.
I think the first thing we should do is just give her a big round of applause for taking some time out of her day to talk with us. We're all muted, but thank you.
Use this thing, this is my new favorite thing.
Oh yeah, that's a great tool.
I put some wire in that open area.
I just had to mute us.
Okay. So we have a few questions in our chat, and if you guys have any more questions, you can type them in our chat or message them to me or whatever's easier for you.
I have a question.
Yeah, we can
Peggy,
even raise our
can you hear
hand.
me? Peggy Gordon, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're going in and out a little bit, but we can hear you pretty good. You want to start us off with your question?
Well, due to the virus, I was cruising the internet and I found the CDC Grand Rounds panel discussion that occurred last, I think, November or October 2019. And it's about PFAS and PFOS and PFAS. And I would encourage people to Google that, just Google CDC Grand Rounds PFAS. And they had three experts and a community activist from Michigan talking about research and all of the work that's been done. I mean, I'm a neophyte on all of this, but have been involved and went up and spoke at, the listening tour in Fayetteville. But a lot of this research, I mean, I'm glad we're doing it locally, but there's a lot that's been done and linked medically to different problems over the last 20 years. At least that was what I got from that Grand Rounds discussion. And I wonder how much the legislators and elected officials and other people are in the loop as an outcome for all of the research. I mean, this is stuff that we know has been bad and is bad. I live in Brunswick County part-time. I'm from Colorado, so I'm here back and forth. But I'm just wondering if from that perspective, we need to eliminate these chemicals. And I don't know what more it takes. I mean, it seems like we're being poisoned slowly. That's not a question, I guess, mostly a statement, but that's all.
Yeah, so I do know that the North Carolina legislature is really involved and concerned. I think it always becomes a challenge of getting enough people to, like, unless you do something statewide, it's been harder to kind of focus on target areas. EPA is supposed to be regulating things. You can read on all about that. And I know that Riverwatch and other organizations are really active at trying to reduce PFAS. And I should say that ATSCR, which is part of CDC, have proposed, is working on a study that's a multi-site study of PFAS around the United States. I had heard recently that it was on pause due to COVID. But I also know that ATSCR is working on developing a model of historically reconstructing PFAS exposure for Wilmington, which would then make it a great opportunity to be able to do these health surveys, because exposure reconstruction sounds easy until you try to do it. So I think that will be great. So, all right, any questions maybe about the science? I can't really change the politics.
We have a few questions in our chat. Maybe we can start there.
Okay, I can read them, Charlie.
Okay, cool.
I can read them. All right, so it sounds like Anna Campbell, do you know if there are studies about chemicals in our soil and impacts they have on food grown in that soil that we consume? So there is a researcher at NC State named Owen Duckworth, and he has some funding through the NC Policy through the NC PFAS Testing Network, as well as another project that he and Detlef are on, where he's looking at how compost, like the percent of compost that you would have in your soil, how that really led to reduced uptake of PFAS from the soil. So there is work happening from that. I can send maybe Charlie kind of some contact information about websites that you can go to learn more. All right. Okay, Joanna, are there statistical models that estimate toxic mechanisms of actions of group of chemicals such as PFAS? PFAS are probably exerting efforts on the body through common mechanisms of action. There are toxicologists on here who know more than I. So I think it's fair to say that we don't really know what the mechanisms of action are all, like that a common mechanism of action would be, because just the complexity of potential health outcomes. We know increased cholesterol, altered thyroid disease, ulcerative colitis, reduced response to vaccines. So there's probably a lot going on with these chemicals. And maybe Earl or Drake, do you have anything more that you could add to that question?
So my studies with Justin Connolly at the RTP EPA lab would concur with your conclusion that there are probably multiple mechanisms. And so the different PFAS will have cumulative effects depending upon their potencies for each mechanism.
So,
but
yeah.
we really don't know yet specifically what the molecular mechanisms are.
And I think this is the problem that we face as environmental epidemiologists, is that the first thing is you start to measure these new chemicals, whether they're in blood or urine, and then there's limited toxicology data to help answer those questions. And for some of the chemicals related to chemours, they weren't registered. So there was no testing done at all because they were byproducts of chemical production. And so that's why we don't know anything about PFMOAA or Naphthalene byproduct 2, because there was nothing done before these chemicals were measured really in people. And then it was like, oh, we need to know what they do. So it's a really bad system. So Drake asked me about historical urine samples. Like, well, that would be awesome if we could find that. It was a lot of work to find historical blood samples, which were frequently, like UNC has a study that relates to cancer survivorship. And so they have stored blood samples from people all over North Carolina. And that's where we were able to get those samples. But blood, they store, yeah, so we don't have, I haven't been able to find stored urine samples. And we really, so, but we're doing what we can. Have you considered follow-up questionnaires or interviewed with those tested to determine ongoing or new health issues? Yeah, so that's what our plan is that we will, when we, the people who are in the study, we'll add more people to the study, but we'll continue to follow all these people so that we can, and one of the things is we can design questionnaires to get it at topics that we think are, that people in the community think are important, so we can really quantify that better. All right. Okay, Tom McKinney, I can help you with. Okay, Tom, I'll send you my email address, or my jahoppin@ncsu.edu. So we'll talk. Joanna, half-life of blood may differ significantly from half-life in bodily tissues. No, especially when they have specific binding targets. absolutely half-lives can differ by organs, but we only can measure blood. People aren't really parting with other tissues, which is why, I mean, we're also, urine will let us know about the chemicals that have shorter half-lives. So yeah, where these are hanging out, we don't know, but they bind to proteins, but what we can measure really more easily is half-life in blood. Camille asked, if we eliminated these chemicals, what do we do with the new ones the chemical companies come up with? Yeah, so what's the next solution? And I feel personally that we can't be afraid of technology, but I don't understand why we can make high-tech chemicals and use waste distribution practices from the 1500s. So that really require the technology from the front to the end. We know how to, there are other ways to dispose of waste than direct discharge to the water or air. And so how do we make that an important part of the process? So that would be my 2 cents. All right, Mike Waters, 1200. Okay, we'll try to get, okay, Mike, what's your question? The presentation that I've done with community, more than 1200. Pushing on Facebook live stream would be beneficial as we have over 3,400 wells detected above consent order. How much funded is needed working? What do you want? What do you want funding for, Mike? What do you want to know what the question is? Okay, Anna wants some, right. Australia has a good health survey, thought about using that. Yeah, we haven't, so the health survey is really like a pie in the sky idea. But I think that we'll try to engage people in thinking about that, because it's a lot of work to do these studies, and I can have my good idea, but my good idea becomes a great idea when I get input from other folks, and so that we can really do what's important. All right, so I think I plowed through the chat. Any other comments, questions? It's probably beautiful in Wilmington right now.
I'm not seeing any other comments on our Facebook Live, so if anyone is with us from there and wants to share their comment, do so now. Does anyone else have a question they could just ask instead of putting into our chat? No, all right. So we're getting a bunch of thank yous. Thank you, Jane. We'll try to get each other's contact information and get that to you guys if you guys would like to reach out to her. So we have, I think, one email in our chat. So that's great. We do want to recognize Marsha Morgan for being with us. You know, as a 501c3 nonprofit, we don't endorse specific elected officials or candidates, but do like for people to know about environmental issues and know kind of who is going to show up for them and for those issues. So thanks, Marsha, for being with us. And I don't know if we have any other candidates or elected officials, but hello to them and thanks for being with us. But yeah, thank you so much, Jane. If anyone has any last minute questions, voice those right now. But if not,
I miss the pancakes.
I've heard about the pancakes. I'm very excited to hopefully be a part of those pancakes soon. But
thank you.
Yeah. All right, let's give Jane the last round of applause.
Well, thank you. And yeah, you'll hear more from me hopefully soon as we figure out how to move forward.
All right. Thank you all for being with us. Thanks, Jane. I don't think